My name is Markus Pluschkovits, and I'm very happy to present LexAT21, not really just me, but in the name of our entire team. Some of us are also here. So hi, Jakob, hi, Olivia, who are also sitting with us and who might assist me with some of the more technical questions. So we all love acronyms. What does this mean? So what is LexAT21? And behind this acronym, there's something actually quite sensible, quite easy. It's an atlas on lexical variation in Austria in the 21st century. You can check this out either by going to the URL displayed here or scanning the QR code. It's a project that's a cooperation between the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities and a special research program, German in Austria. And basically what we're investigating here is lexical variation within the borders of contemporary Austria, all based on empirical analysis. So our data comes from a series of online questionnaires. A sensible question would be to ask, why is this interesting? So what is it about linguistic variation that interests us, and what is linguistic variation in general? We follow the seminal definition of Labov in this case and see social and stylistic variation as the option of saying the same thing in several different ways. So we have some variants and they are identical in reference or truth value, so they mean the same thing in a way, but they stand opposed in their social or stylistic significance. This, of course, is especially interesting for the German context because German is not just spoken in Germany, as you know, it's also spoken in Austria and Switzerland and all over the world, actually, but specifically in the what we call DACH region, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The variation that is exhibited in a language is characterized strongly by what we call a pluri-areal and pluricentric context. That just means that there are different ways of characterizing this variation. Some of this variation may follow national borders. So, for example, everyone in Germany calls the exit exam of the upper secondary school Abitur. Everyone in Austria calls it a Matura, but there's also much more variation happening in smaller contexts. Very salient, this kind of variation happens all over the language, but very saliently, it happens on the lexical level. So people use different words to essentially mean the same thing. What is surprising is that there has not been that much research on lexical variation. This topic is fairly underrepresented, given the fact that it's so salient for speakers. So speakers usually notice that people use different words than them. And this research gap is especially prominent with regard to systematic large-scale studies, so studies that actually rest on a broad empirical basis. And what's also a very prominent research gap is that we do not get a lot of research on intra-individual variation, so meaning on variation within an individuum, because most of speakers have more than one way of saying one thing. They have more than one word for a concept, but how they vary between what words, what terms they use, that is not that well understood and not that well studied. We aim to fill that research gap specifically by looking also not just at areal variation, but at the social or intra-individual variation. And we collect a lot of data. You can see here how we do that. Basically, we present a picture stimulus, in this case of what I would call in English a hat or a cap, accompanied by a verbal instruction. So what do you call the garment shown in the picture? And then we ask our respondents to fill in the blank in two different registers, one of them being their register that is distant from standard language. Here this would be dialect, and then on the other hand in a register that is close to their standard German, in this case your best High German, ihr bestes Hochdeutsch. We vary the glottonyms, so the names for the registers, according to two different angles. On the one hand, not every speaker would say that they speak a dialect, so we vary the standard, the register that is removed from standard, according to what the speaker tells us. So the first question of this questionnaire will always be, do you speak a dialect that is distinct from standard German, or do you speak something that could be categorized as Umgangssprache, so everyday language? And depending on what our respondents choose on that initial question, the stimulus is varied, saying either answering your dialect or answering your everyday language. With regard to the standard register, from a different study, we have identified what speakers commonly associate with standard language. It's usually the term High German. and we vary according to three different terms. These are chosen at random. So we either ask them to answer in their best High German, in their Austrian High German, ihr österreichisches Hochdeutsch, or in your High German, in ihrem Hochdeutsch. And then we have an additional blank for any other terms that they might use regardless of register. All of this data, so say, delves into the LexAT21 atlas. I've brought a short sample on how the front end looks like. So the online front end that you can look at the data here for cap, so for the variable Mütze Haube, which is a cap. And this is just like a short tour where you can see, if it starts, let's see. Where you can see all the different phenomena for the first round of questions. That was 45 different phenomena. You can choose what register you want to target. So either just those registers close to standard or those far from standard, so dialect and everyday language. You can see the different variants that people actually use and focus some of them exclusively. So here you can see just a couple of the variants that people give us, and you can vary according to, for example, the age of the participants. And all of this is mapped. We have some further convenient features, for example, only showing state capitals, so more urban centers, for example. And in order to produce pretty maps, you can also adapt the colors. Important to us is that you not just look at different maps, but also see what the database is behind that. So behind every map, you can click a link that will take you to the exact database for the map you have just produced. So here, for example, only speakers below the age of 70 and only in their dialect. And you can immediately download all of this as CSV data in order to do whatever you want with that data that you get in the end. This is, so to say, not just the only thing you can do with that. Of course, there also is a linguistic dimension to this. I've brought here, we have just seen this small case study on, so to say, to show a little bit the diversity here. You can see there is also an essay written on this phenomenon. A lot of the different phenomena are accompanied by short essays on, a linguistic interpretation. And this case study is based on roughly 2,000 speakers in roughly 600 localities across Austria. What is immediately noticeable is that there's a dominant variety that is used to refer to this concept of a hat in Austria. And the most common one overall is Haube for the east of Austria. So the eastern part, more or less, the entire eastern part, will refer to it by a large chance to Haube. Whereas you can see on the west here, which is where it gets a bit darker and we see more of the yellow parts, this is Kappen territory. So people use a different word there. You can see, just look at it in isolation, and there you see there really is, so to say, between the east and the west, a difference on how people refer to this. This is just the areal variation. If we look closely into the vertical variation, so the social variation, you can see that that actually differs depending on whether or not someone conceptualized the language use as standard or non-standard. So for the standard registers, we still see a large dominance of Haube. So all of the red dots in the upper corner, there you can see this is Haube, except for the east, where they refer to it as Kappe. But this is associated with standard language use. In the non-standard, so when people answer for their dialect or their everyday language, you can see the dominance of Haube is waning a little bit. Also in the east, people would usually or would likely more refer to it as a Mütze in a way, so all of the blue dots. And this is then also true for the west, where not everyone says Kappe anymore. So this is just a very brief glimpse into why this is linguistically interesting. There's actually a lot of variation happening within language use in the Austrian speaker community. This brings me, so to say, on what this brings to the CLARIN context. So why is this interesting for people that are interested in language data overall? In principle, we conceptualize two main outcomes out of the LexAT project. One of them being open data. We have a lot of data points. So for the first round, this is more than 200,000 data points that are annotated manually. So these are like high quality data, and we use them as open data. So you can download all of the data of round one right now. As soon as we integrate the data into our database, it is open data, it becomes accessible. But what it's not is fair. So this is something we're currently working on to make the data not just open, but actually to make it into fair data. And that is the one part we're currently working on. The other outcome that could be interesting or is interesting are the articles themselves, which we currently publish on LexAT21 directly. But since they deal with lexical concepts, they should be interesting or would be interesting to a larger speaker community. So how do we aim to make data more fair? We collect, this is just very briefly, the workflow that we use. We collect the data with an open source tool called LimeSurvey. And as soon as the data collection is done, we integrate that into BaseRow, where we manually annotate the data for lexical type. And it's then integrated into the LexAT21 database, which is just a postgres database. From there, different API endpoints deliver the data to LexAT21, where you can see it in the front end. And where we're currently working, what we're currently working on is integrating, transforming that data into TI objects, which we will then integrate into Arche, which is the repository of the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities, and which is linked to the Virtual Language Observatory, where you can put a flag and say, hey, we want this to be integrated into the VLO so that you can actually find the data and have it properly described. Similarly, for the map commentary, we create the maps and the map commentary natively in LexAT21 and then feed it back into the database, meaning all of the map commentary is saved in the database itself. And from there, we display it in the front end again, utilizing Zotero for our bibliography. And currently, we're working on making this also TI documents, which will then also be deposited into Arche and thereby connected to the Virtual Language Observatory. How are we doing this? Jakob is utilizing a bash script to actually manage the serialization of the LexAT21 data as a corpus object. This encompasses all of the responses, so what people actually put down, all of the informant data, so how where the data comes from, how old the informants are, and so on, and the annotations, so how they were classified by linguists, and all of this is, so to say, broken down into different partials so that we can actually replicate this import strategy, because the data, as soon as we integrate it, is still being worked with and might still be recategorized. So this is, so to say, a continuous process. The map commentary will be displayed as individual documents, so every map commentary should be, so to say, a closed off thing as well, where we integrate the data as well, and all of these import steps are then deployed via GitHub Actions. Now, because this is still a work in progress, I kind of brought two things that might be quite helpful for me for the discussion. One of them is the issue of the glottonyms in the TI modeling, and the other one is a question of whether or not they're reference models for the queried concepts, because they range from very concrete things like a cap to very abstract things, for example, like the act of smoking tobacco or something. So we have a very heterogeneous thing, and I would be interested if there's something besides Wikidata that you could recommend as a reference model. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. And if you happen to speak or learn how to speak German in Austria, invitation to join us with our data collection effort. Thank you very much.
Just a small question. How do you deal with the spelling variation? People, I mean, if they enter dialect words, I can imagine there's a lot of variation.
Yes, absolutely. This is very often people will try to emulate their phonetics by just spelling it differently, and we categorize it according to lexemes. So, for example, for Haube, that would be Ham, Haubar, or something. And this is done as a step of manual annotation mostly.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that you want to make the data open, you want to do it as quickly as possible, which is perfect. But that means that your data is constantly changing, and at a certain point you want to bring it to the VLO, but that will also change all the time. Do you have a strategy of how often you do it, or did you think about that?
Yes. Currently, we're conceptualizing this as rounds. So whenever we have enough, so to say, new interesting concepts, we start a new round of surveys. And then we aim for 2,000 participants. And this is kind of like the cutoff point for us, where we say, okay, these are 2,000 participants. And this is to keep it comparable. And then we start the process of annotation. And we then have like one rough annotation, which will be our first data set. And this is usually the first time we bring it into LexAT properly, because our linguists work with the front end. And this is, so to say, our aim, that this is the first time this data is open, exists. And usually, from our experience now, there follows a second step when all of the corrections are done. But since we close the actual surveys, as soon as we have another survey open, we thankfully have like a final version of each data set at a certain point.
Yeah, thanks for your very interesting presentation. You mentioned at the end that you would like to know a little bit more about other ontologies than Wikidata. And as you might have heard, CLARIN is moving towards Wikidata. So I'm now interested in why you think Wikidata is maybe not the best.
Yeah, the issue with Wikidata is, in a way, because it can be very specific. So, for example, one of the curious concepts that we have is a dragonfly, because this had historically a lot of variation within the way people refer to it, not so much anymore. But you get a lot of different answers because some people will, for example, realize, oh, this is this exact specific dragonfly, and name it with, for example, the Latin name. And others will not even recognize the insect and will just say like, oh, this is a fly, for example. And this puts us in a way, okay, what is the reference category here? Because each specific like subspecies of a dragonfly will have its own Wikidata ID. And obviously we cannot really connect the answer that was given to a picture of a dragonfly to a picture, so to say, to a range with the concept of fly. So I was kind of hoping, for example, for dictionaries, dialect dictionaries, the Heilig-Wartburg terminology was very often used in the pre-digital age, because it could like adapt to this flexibility a bit. And now we're wondering if there's maybe something that would be used in like contemporary dialect dictionaries, for example, or something. But Wikidata is definitely something we're considering.